Here are the 5 big changes that are going to happen to Lyft and Uber in 2024. Welcome back to Buck Living, a channel all about making money. On this channel, of course, a big aspect of that is the gig economy and being more specific, ride sharing in terms of Uber and Lyft. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I do believe that 2024 in general, and I think both good and bad ways, which I'm going to talk about, is going to be a big year for ride sharing. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 big things I think are going to happen in 2024. Number 1, unions. Now I'm going to be honest, that one word is a hugely massive topic. I've not really talked about unions when it comes to Uber and Lyft. I've mentioned it maybe a few times. It should definitely be an entire dedicated video in of itself. But Massachusetts, for example, has talked about forming unions when it comes to rideshare drivers. It is no surprise to anybody that drivers get screwed over daily, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And because of certain protections that are happening and certain things that are happening state by state, it is something that back in the day wasn't really as much of a talk, but now if you look at things like what happened with the writer's strike here in Los Angeles, for example, and other places, it's not an unrealistic thing to say that for next year, with all these different groups, whether it's writers or nurses or hotel workers, with all these different groups showing the power of going on strike and looking to form unions, that could trickle into ride sharing, especially with what's going on. And like I said, this should be an entire dedicated video in of itself. And I personally think, to be honest, that there should definitely be a union for Uber and Lyft and ride sharing in general. Of course, Uber and Lyft does not want that, of course. But like I said, it's very interesting, and I've mentioned this before in other videos, that there's so many different rules, state to state, and even city to city when it comes to ride sharing. It's not just a federal thing, although that's part of it. It's kind of weird that the government, for certain industries, ride sharing being one of them, is like, all right, each state, the 50 of you, you guys figure this out. So there is different developments in each of an area around the country, which is kind of unfortunate. But like I said, Massachusetts, there's now talk about forming a union, and there's been talk about maybe pushing it through in terms of the legislation for a union in terms of Massachusetts. And like I've mentioned in so many other videos, when one state does something that's a groundbreaking thing, especially with ride sharing, it does have that trickle effect to other states and even potentially maybe something government-wide in terms of the federal level. Of course, we'll have to see what happens, but I think the whole topic of unions, especially next year, is going to be a massive topic. Number 2, too many drivers. I think out of any of these, it is tough to say, right? Obviously, this is all my predictions, right? This is all my guesses based off all the evidence I've seen. I've read hundreds, probably over 1,000 articles doing all these videos for this channel. I've interviewed over 1,000 drivers at this point. I've digested, if that's the right word, a lot of Uber and Lyft information. And my biggest prediction for next year that I think is going to be a massive issue is the fact that there's going to be too many drivers on the road. This, I'm going to be honest, the first one, talking about unions, I think is a good thing for rideshare drivers. For Uber and Lyft, it's not. Let's be honest. But for rideshare drivers, of course, unions are super important to have, especially for ride sharing. When it comes to this, though, this is a bad thing for rideshare drivers, right? And maybe even Uber and Lyft as well. It's tough to say. But here's the issue. With inflation getting worse, with the economy getting worse, with a lot of people having to spend more money for groceries, I've seen a bunch of memes, and you've probably seen them as well, about like how it costs $20 for a gallon of milk now, and things are getting so expensive. A lot of people are saying, you know what? I was good at my 9-to-5 job 10 or 15 years ago. I need extra side cash. I need extra side cash. Even if, let's say, you don't even need it. If, let's say, you just want to go out. I've mentioned this before in other videos. In case you don't know, it's super random, but a bottle of New Amsterdam vodka, very low shelf vodka, is about $15 to $16. I went to a bar recently, bought 2 shots of New Amsterdam vodka, the cheapest vodka they had, because I was with a friend, with tax, tip, and blah, blah, blah. It came to almost $50. It was $20 a shot for this low-quality vodka. And this is just one story among a lot of them with things just getting more expensive. And as a result, like I said, even if you don't need the money, people are like, well, I need money because I want to maybe go out to the bar and at least relax. I want to go to this one concert, and things are just so expensive. So a lot of people And it's probably not surprising. This the bittersweet nature of Lyft and Uber is the barrier is so low. All you really need is a driver's license, and you don't even need a car because you can rent one. But most people, I feel like, who are looking at Lyft and Uber, especially looking at it part-time, already have a vehicle. And they're like, hey, I have my car. I have my driver's license. I don't need a degree. I don't need to be certified or anything. I just sign up. Boom, I can start driving. And with people looking for secondary jobs, this is becoming a massive, massive issue because on one end, that's great. It's great that Uber and Lyft is a great tool, if I'd use that word, for people going out and driving. But that means in 2024, I'm going to predict there's never going to be, I think, a time, and we'll see what happens in 2025, but there's never going to be a bigger time for there to be more drivers on the road. And that can only cause issues for Uber and Lyft drivers. It could be possible that you turn on the app and they say, hey, sorry, you can't drive, too many drivers on the road. I don't think they would do that, but that's a possibility. I think a bigger possibility is you turn on the app and you wait around 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you're like, I used to get rides like that. Like typically when it comes to Uber and Lyft, in case you don't know, there's like an overlapping system where before you drop somebody off, it will say, hey, there's a ride available. Here's how much it might cost and everything. Do you want to accept? So you're almost overlapping. Back in the day when I first started driving, it was very kind of static. It was like you pick somebody up, drop them off, ride ends. You wait. You pick somebody up, drop them off, ride ends. You wait. Now you're kind of almost always overlapping, where by the time you drop somebody off, you're already set up for another ride. It's way more efficient, and just in general, you typically make more money that way. If there's too many drivers on the road, though, it may be that static way back in the day, and I've even had drivers comment, because I've done videos about what could happen in 2024, and I've mentioned this, too many drivers being on the road. I've already gotten comments on this channel of people saying, yeah, Mark, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of already happening. I would get ride after ride after ride and everything. I had to wait 5 or 6 minutes doing nothing just to get a ride. Now, to people who don't drive, you're probably like, oh, you only waited 5 minutes. What, you were just sitting in your car waiting 5 minutes? But for a rideshare driver, 5 minutes is an eternity. That's a long time to wait for a ride. And I will say, this does depend Lyft versus Uber. Typically, Uber, I will say, and I have no dog in the race when it comes to Uber versus Lyft. I'll do some videos about that. But when it comes to Uber versus Lyft, though, when it comes to getting rides, though, typically you're going to get them a lot faster with Uber. I just want to say that. Like, Uber's a lot easier to get a ride, typically, depending on the area, than Lyft. But even still, there are people waiting. And like I said, with too many drivers being on the road, I can only see it being harder and harder to get a ride, which means that overall, it's going to be harder for you to make more money, right? And I've mentioned this before, this kind of odd paradox where, let's say you want to drive on a Friday night. Arguably, Friday, Saturday nights are the best times to drive. Not always, I think, but typically, right? If you think about it, if more people are going to drive on a Friday night because it's the peak hours, you're going to make the most amount of money, it's going to be harder to get a ride. And then in the non-peak hours, like say Tuesday at 1 p.m. is a classic example I use, it actually might be easier to get a ride because there's not that many drivers on the road. Now, of course, it's tough to say, but I've talked to some drivers here in Los Angeles, for example, who have told me like, yeah, I typically drive on a Friday night, or I used to, but now when I go to drive on a Friday night, there's so many drivers on the road because I want to make that Friday night, people going out and drinking type money, and they're like, I'm not making that much money anymore. I actually make more money other times because there's less drivers on the road, and it's easier for me to get a ride. And this kind of classic example of that story, I think, is only going to get worse in 2024. Again, it is tough to say, right? Remember, this video is pure speculation. But I think too many drivers being on the road is not going to equal anything positive for any rideshare drivers out there. Number 3, deactivation. Now, this is a positive one, right? I think this is a good one, although it sounds weird for me to say positive right after saying deactivation. In case you don't know, it's very common, unfortunately getting more and more common, in a sense, where, like, say you're driving, classic example, a passenger says, oh, they were drunk because the passenger wants to retaliate against you, or there was a dispute. Your account gets deactivated for a week. You can't drive for a week. And then Uber and Lyft puts your account back in a good standing. They say, oh, we're sorry, but now you just missed out on a week's worth of work. This has been getting worse and worse over the years. Like, deactivation wasn't even a word that was said when I first started driving. Now it's very common. And as you can imagine, if you're relying on Lyft and Uber, you would now have this anxiety in the back of your head if you do get deactivated every time you pull up the app and you're wondering, am I going to be able to drive? Or do I hit that button and it says, sorry, your account's being deactivated, you're being, I don't know, we're having someone look over your account and reviewing your account and everything just to make sure you're not a bad driver or blah, 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 right? We're reviewing the claim a passenger made. Now, one good development of this, which I think is a good thing, is Uber. Got to give them credit, because sometimes I feel like most of the time, it's like 75 to 80% of the time, Lyft is doing a really good thing, and Uber just kind of sits back and they're like, whatever. This, I got to give Uber credit, credit's due. So what Uber's doing now is they're now making it harder for passengers just to deactivate somebody or to give them a bad rating because the passenger was just in a bad mood. Uber is now putting steps moving forward. I've done an entire dedicated video about this to make sure that deactivation is way less frequent when it comes to drivers, and also their rating is not compromised if there's like a minor dispute. And you've seen this, I hear this all the time. Like, say someone gets in the car and, they're like, hey, why'd you charge me $50 for this ride? And the driver's like, I don't make the prices, Uber does. I'm sorry, I'm just driving. And they're like, okay, but why'd you charge me $50? And the driver's like, I don't make the prices. And the person says, you know what? I'm going to make up something that I'm going to give him 1 star and say, oh, they were clearly drunk, right? And the passenger makes all this stuff up. Uber's now putting certain protocols in place to make sure that happens less frequently. And if it does, the driver or you does not get compromised as a result. I think this is good. I think it's a good step forward. There have been talks. I think it was, I can't remember. Was it Chicago, Minnesota? I can't remember what state it was. There was one state, it didn't go through, which is kind of annoying. But they said if someone gets deactivated or wrongfully deactivated, they would try to push it forward in terms of the law that Uber and Lyft would have to retroactively pay you money because you're like, hey, we deactivated you, we were wrong. And Uber and Lyft doesn't lose out on anything, but you just lost out on a week's worth of work. They should retroactively compensate you for that. It didn't go through, but at least it's nice now that even lawmakers are now understanding the whole concept, not just of Lyft and Uber, of course, because everyone kind of knows it now, but of deactivation and how big of an issue it is. And I feel like in 2024, at least with what Uber's doing, hopefully it will make things a little bit better, where deactivation will be a lot less common. Number 4, more guarantees. This is another good one. This is another big one. Now, in case you don't know, I mentioned this before in other videos. In California, there was something that got put forward in terms of Prop 22. Should rideshare drivers be independent contractors or employees? Now, at least here in California, drivers are still independent contractors. However, one positive aspect of Prop 22 is there were clauses under that, regardless of what happens, saying, look, drivers now need minimum hourly guarantees. If you go on the app and you do a few rides and you only make $5, Uber and Lyft has to bump you back up to the minimum hourly guarantee. You get benefits, you get protection, health insurance got now kind of put forth when it comes to rideshare drivers and a lot more. In addition, what just happened with New York, in case you don't know, Uber and Lyft had to pay over $300 million because they were found guilty in terms of not paying drivers in terms of different retroactive stuff, for lack of a better word. I did an entire dedicated video about this. But in terms of the financial aspect and the repercussion of that, they now say, look, drivers should get maybe sick pay. Drivers should get minimum hourly guarantees in New York, et cetera, right? So it's now interesting seeing the different states. And like I said, it's kind of annoying that when it comes to the law in general, state to state is very different, sometimes even city to city. But in this case, let's talk about state to state. It could be common that in 2024, more states will follow suit. And like I said, the ripple effect of Prop 22 here in California, arguably the biggest gig economy hub of the world. Arguably, if you look at things like Los Angeles and San Francisco, especially San Fran being like the hub of Uber and Lyft and ride sharing, or the big start of it. I mean, that was a huge ripple effect. And then New York now, another one of the biggest states when it comes to, I think, a lot of the gig economy as well, having this ripple effect. It could be very common and become more popular. There are a lot of other states say, you know what, we should do the same. Drivers should get at least a minimum hourly guarantee. Drivers should at least get some type of benefits, like if there's health benefits, dental, etc. Drivers should at least get some type of thing when it comes to sick leave or whatever, or sick pay, right? Etc. So these are different things that I think, there's a lot of different ways in terms of more guaranteeing for drivers or more guarantees in general. But this is a big positive effect because with these two big states, California and New York, making massive moves to protect and help drivers, even if it's small, it's a start, right? Even if it's small, it's a start. And I can see a lot of other states following suit. And again, this could be big. I mean, I know what it's like, and I remember what it's like when I was in Boston, where I drive for an hour, I do one ride, and I made $5, and I'm like, I might as well have just made nothing if you consider like my time is valuable too, right? Like as is everybody's. And the fact that I just, sat around waiting, doing nothing, and it's annoying, right? And so I think that the benefit now of having a minimum hourly guarantee all the time is huge. At least if today sucks, you're at least going to make at least $15 an hour. For example, is that an insane amount? No, but at least there's a guarantee in place. Like I said, same thing with health insurance. I've talked before about health insurance in a couple other videos. I think I did those a long time ago, but this is another big thing. Different guarantees for drivers that are just guaranteed, that's integrated now in the part of the ride-sharing world and community and being a rideshare driver, I think are massive improvements. And I think in 2024, with what happened in these two big states, a lot of other states could follow suit. Number 5, the Lyft comeback. Now, when it comes to ride sharing, it's almost impossible to not talk about Uber versus Lyft or Lyft versus Uber, right? And it's interesting that about a year ago, I was almost doing, even in 1 week, a couple videos about Uber versus Lyft in terms of basically Uber doing a lot better, Lyft doing a lot worse. I even did videos being like, what would it look like if Uber purchased Lyft? I don't think that would happen because that'd be such a monopoly on the ride-sharing world. It'd be horrible. But who knows what happened? Could Lyft go out of business? What would happen if Lyft didn't even exist anymore? So Uber didn't even purchase them, and it was just Uber. Now, of course, I don't think that would ever happen. Lyft and Uber has to both exist as a yin and yang. Because, like, say, as a driver, you get, for example, deactivated, like I talked about on one, you could drive for the other, and vice versa. If, let's say, you go to drive for Lyft and it's not paying that much, well, you can then drive for Uber, for example. And especially when it comes to passengers, if let's say you're stranded, it's a Friday night at 3 a.m. and you're in God knows where, right? And you need a Lyft or Uber, you know that at least if you pull up Uber and it says $80 to get home, you're like, all right, let me check Lyft. Lyft says $40. Now, I know some drivers like that, some drivers don't, the fact that most people check both Lyft and Uber, but I think that's actually important because if Uber could charge whatever they wanted, if let's say you're stranded, Uber says, you know what, they're stranded, Lyft doesn't exist anymore, let's just charge them $100. What are they going to do? They have no other option besides us, right? So it's important that both Lyft and Uber are in existence. And I got to give him credit where credit's due. Ever since David Risher became the CEO of Lyft, things have gotten significantly better with Lyft. And like I said, about a year ago, I was like worried. I was like, is Lyft going to tank? Is it just going to go out of business? Is Uber going to take over Lyft, et cetera, et cetera? And now, I think in 2024, the Lyft comeback is actually very, very likely. And I mean, it's already happening, right? Lyft's profits are up. Things are getting significantly better when it comes to Lyft. If you look at a lot of the metrics, a lot of what drivers are getting paid right now, if you look at a lot of things that are going on, all the numbers, right? I could do an entire dedicated video about this. Lyft is getting better and better and better month to month. And again, I got to give him credit. David Risher, love him or hate him. I think if it wasn't for him doing what he did and what he's currently doing, I don't think Lyft would be standing where it is, being honest. And then I have no affiliation with Dave Risher, although I think he'd be a cool guy to interview. That would be cool. I mean, my channel is super small in the YouTube world and especially the ride-sharing world, but that would be really interesting. I'd love to just interview him about like what he did. I mean, I've done videos about what he did, but like all this kind of methodology behind it and kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff you don't just see super quickly on an article, right? But anyway, I got to say that the Lyft comeback in 2024 is real. I mean, if anything, I'd say that before, like Uber's here, Lyft was here. Now it's like this. Uber's still on top, but Lyft they're gaining steam. They're getting a lot better. Granted, it's kind of almost like a racing game, though, or a race in general, where like, yeah, Lyft is closing the gap, but Uber's still moving up, right? So like, Uber's still getting bigger, but Lyft is slowly closing that gap, right? And I will say that. So I think in 2024, like I said about a year ago, I was like, Lyft, is Lyft done? Is Lyft kicked, right? So to speak, forever. I'm going to say no. And the Lyft comeback in 2024, I think is going to be real. And being honest, from my perspective, because, I talked about before both the negatives and the positives on this video about different points, I think this is only good for drivers. I think Lyft getting better and, and stuff like that, I think is only going to be beneficial for drivers. And I've had drivers tell me, it does depend on the different area, that Lyft pays way more than Uber. If Lyft went away, as a driver, you'd be stuck with Uber. Whether it pays you a lot or little, you're stuck with it. At least with Lyft, you have another option, and especially if they're paying you more than Uber, hey, huge win. And now a bonus topic of a big thing that's going to happen in 2024, a big prediction, and that's delivery driving. Now, I've done a dedicated video about this when it comes to the scary part of Uber Eats. And in that video, I should have structured the video differently because most people, as you can imagine, when it comes to a YouTube video, watch the beginning and slowly tailor off. It's called audience retention, right? I've done some videos about being a YouTuber on this channel, but it's called audience retention. It typically declines over the course of a video, right? So for example, there's the least amount of people watching this video right now compared to the beginning of the video, right? That's just the nature of a YouTube video, even if you're like Mr. Beast or something, unless you have some big finale at the end. But this is a big one, because in that video that I did about Uber Eats, the first 3 minutes were a bit too long, and I talked about that people are now not using delivery driving because it's becoming too expensive. There was one thing, I can't remember the exact percentage, but someone was comparing from a couple years ago what their order was to now, and the order was significantly more expensive now than before, right? And again, I've talked before about inflation and everything. We all know things are more expensive. But it's becoming, I think, a big issue. And I think in 2024, I think back in the day when I used Uber Eats, yeah, it's always going to be more expensive. We all know that, right? It's always going to be overpriced. There's BS fees. There's all these different things, blah, blah. But I think it was still, at least you're like, you know what? It's Friday night. It's 9 p.m. I just got back from work. I'm exhausted. I had to deal with a bunch of traffic. I'm going to treat myself and get some Uber Eats so I can sit in. I don't have to cook. I don't have to clean or anything, right? Now, though, I think a lot of people are like, you know what? It's still not, it's not worth it now. Before, it really wasn't worth it. Still, it's super overpriced. But now it's even more not worth it. And as you can imagine, I know this sounds kind of stupid to say, but very important. Because I know a lot of delivery drivers are like, hey, people complain about prices, but who cares? I just need to do deliveries. If no one uses Uber Eats or Postmates or Doordash or Grubhub or Skip the Dishes, which is in Canada, for example, if no one orders and does delivery orders, no delivery driver can get paid. The only reason why delivery drivers exist is because of people using those services. Again, simple to say, but very important for this point. Then in 2024, I'd be curious if delivery driving, in addition to rideshare driving like Uber Eats, will be compromised. Now, granted, in case you don't know, if you sign up for Uber almost automatically signs you up for Uber Eats. You could do both at the same time if you want, which I think would be kind of hectic, or you could do one or the other. I've done some videos about how to just select only Uber Eats orders and only Uber orders. And for me personally, like I said before in other videos, I hated delivery driving. There are some people who love it. Wasn't my thing. I hated being a delivery driver, if you want to be honest. I love being a rideshare driver, right? But when it comes to this, though, whether you love it or hate it, it's going to be, I think, harder to be one. One, I think it's two biggest points. One, very similar to what I talked about earlier in this video, too many drivers. Not just with rideshare drivers, but if there's a lot of people, if you think about it, looking for the gig economy, I actually think it compromises, and it's tough to say, I think delivery driving more, because the barrier to entry for Uber and Lyft is here. But for delivery driving, it's more here. You could be a younger age to be a delivery driver. You don't have to have strict vehicle requirements. You can have friends with you when you do delivery driving. And I've mentioned this, that it's interesting now, about half the time, I always go out and meet the delivery driver. I think it's just respectful because they have to come up to the apartment. I think it's easier for me to go out there and be respectful, right? As about half the time, they have someone else with them, right? You don't have to worry about your car being super, super clean. I talked about yesterday using your own vehicle. That's one kind of thing you have to do. Keep your car clean, make sure it smells good, get car washes. Your car can look like whatever. You're doing delivery driving, right? It doesn't matter. So there's all these different benefits. But with those benefits, there's that lower barrier to entry, which means if more people need to get a second side job for the gig economy and inflation getting worse and people need that second side job, it's going to be easier to become a delivery driver, which means there's going to be less deliveries to be made, right? So the first thing is if there's so many delivery drivers on the road, you're just going to get less money. Like I talked about before when it comes to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. You might turn on the app, wait 5 or 10 minutes just to get a delivery. That's going to be very, very frustrating. The second thing, which is a big one specifically now for delivery driving, rideshare driving has not really reached this point yet. I think the reason why is for rideshare driving, a lot of people look at it as you have to get a Lyft and Uber. If you're drinking, you have to order one, of course. If you need to get to and from work and you don't have a car, you have to order it. Delivery driving is looked at as kind of a fun thing to do. You know what? I don't need it, but I'm going to treat myself. It's looked at as like a big treat, right? And the big thing, though, like I said, and when it comes to point number 2, like I was just talking about, is the overpricing of everything. Fees. Restaurants now have to overprice their items. And it's not the restaurant's fault. It's actually Uber Eats, because Uber Eats takes such a huge cut. Restaurant says, yeah, typically we charge $8 for a burrito. we're going to charge $12 on Uber Eats because we need to make ends meet, right? Being a restaurant in general is super difficult. The margins are razor thin. I remember learning when I was an accountant and business that starting a restaurant in the restaurant industry is one of the hardest industries. It's brutally difficult. And then when Uber Eats takes a massive cut out of the restaurant's earnings, restaurants are like, look, we have to charge more money for our items because or else we're going to go out of business, right? And so you're talking about, like, say, spending $12 for a burrito that typically is $8, but it's already overpriced, and now you have to pay a bunch of fees on top of that. A lot of people are saying, you know what? Yeah, I understand that Uber Eats is a treat. Postmates is a treat. I don't have to do it per se, but now I'm at the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm just not going to do it. I'd rather just buy a bunch of microwavable burritos and have them kind of on deck, so to speak, in terms of, like, if I ever need one, boom, it's right there in my freezer, for example. And with the second point, with there being more and more delivery drivers on the road, and there being less people ordering delivery as a result of these crazy fees and things being more overpriced, that gap is not good. And the gap for rideshare drivers, in my opinion, is more like this, right? More like this. Well, let's say there's going to be more drivers on the road. People are still ordering Ubers and Lyfts, but it's more the drivers increasing. But when it comes to delivery driving, it's almost a double whammy of there being more drivers on the road doing delivery driving and less people in 2024 ordering delivery.